The intense battle between the simp and the sassy man rages on with no end in sight. The sassy man launches yet another attack, but the simp remains unfazed as she summons her vines to deflect it. The simp counters with a dazzling sunflower attack, raining seeds down upon the sassy man. Little did he know, a massive palm made of vines loomed directly above him, and he was promptly smashed by it. Just as the simp believed she had the upper hand, the sassy man sliced the vines to 1,000,000 pieces and they continued to exchange attacks and abilities back and forth. In a moment of hesitation, the simp allowed the sassy man to penetrate her defense and he landed a powerful ability on her. Fortunately, it wasn't fatal, but it left her feeling vulnerable. Suddenly, the sassy man felt the sense of the werewolf disappear. There was only one explanation: the werewolf had been defeated. Exhausted and powerless, the simp could barely move her fingers. Her power had weakened, causing her plants to wither. She had never felt so helpless in her life, and memories of her past flooded her mind. As a child, she remembered sitting by a tree trunk near the river, crying and yelling while covering her face. Chenemo had been calling her name and searching for her in the forest, wondering why she had run away from class. At that moment, Chenemo had approached her and tried to console her. She had told the simp that pure strength wasn't everything and that she didn't have to face everyone head-on all the time. Chenemo had seen great potential in the simp and encouraged her to keep training and become stronger. But the simp had tearfully responded that it was useless to keep training if she couldn't beat anyone head-on. Chenemo had leaned in closer, looking her in the eyes and telling her that her observation skills were her strength and it's the best she had ever seen. With a gentle smile, Chenemo reached out and grasped the simp's hand, instilling her with the confidence and self-belief that she needed to keep fighting. "You can do this," she whispered, her voice brimming with encouragement. Spurred on by her words, the simp rose to her feet, her determination unwavering. She let out a fierce battle cry and demanded the sassy man to stop. The sassy man was caught off guard by her sudden burst of strength, and he sneered as he launched a series of attacks in her direction. This time, Simp did not attempt to defend against the attack but rather used her keen senses to predict the path and carefully dodged to the side. Undaunted, the Simp observed his movements carefully, her senses sharp and focused. She soon realized that his attacks were all coming from his shadows, and without hesitation, she summoned her beast and unleashed the power of blue motion. In a breathtaking display of beauty and power, the ground erupted in a sea of brilliant yellow flowers, their vibrant hues illuminating the battlefield. The sassy man was taken aback by the sudden burst of light, and for a moment, he faltered. But the Simp did not hesitate. She charged forward once more, her eyes blazing with determination. With every step she took, the flowers around her grew taller and stronger, until she was surrounded by a wall of golden blooms. Simp charged towards the sassy man with a sword fashioned from the very vines of the earth. With a swift and powerful swing, she struck at the looming shadow figure that was the sassy man's beast, a shadow fox. The beast let out a piercing howl, but before it could react, Simp struck again, slicing a deep and savage wound from the sassy man's shoulder down to his thigh. The sassy man was left battered and crumpled on the ground, gasping for breath as blood filled his throat. Words failed him as he tried to speak, his voice reduced to a mere mumble. Slowly, he began to dissolve into a black cloud, his shadowy essence fading into the ether. Determined not to let the sassy man slip away, Simp called upon her beast to trap him. With a fierce snarl, the beast leaped into action, encircling the sassy man with a flurry of vines. But to Simp's horror, she realized that it was all a ruse. The sassy man had already slipped away, leaving only an empty shell of his shadowy essence behind. Exhausted and battered from the intense battle, Simp could take no more. Her body gave out, and she collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Her faithful beast was filled with concern for its owner, rushing to her side to check on her well-being. As the sun began to set on the battlefield, Simp lay there, her breathing shallow and weak. After a short while, the duo made their way back to the ruins of the Spirit Beast Gate's former headquarters. They were shocked to find Simp lying on the ground, completely unresponsive, and severely injured. Tiny Pupa had depleted all of his mana and could no longer use his healing ability to help her. As they pondered their next move, a portal suddenly opened up behind them. A melodic female voice congratulated the duo on completing the basic tutorial and announced that they had passed the test and become the chosen ones. Turning around, they saw a woman with long, silky white hair standing before them. The woman informed them that they had now qualified to fight for the throne. The duo was stunned. They had never heard of such a thing before. The duo listened intently as the realm god continued to speak. She explained that the battle royale would be a fierce competition where only the strongest would survive. The winner would be granted access to the power of the sacred land and be able to rule over all the realms. Tiny Pupa was still confused and angry about not being told about this before reincarnating into this world. The realm god reassured him that she was a loving god who welcomed all souls, but that in this realm, power was the key to survival. In this world, the battle royale is a tradition that dates back centuries. The battle royale is a necessary evil to maintain balance and order in the world. It's a way to weed out the weak and ensure that only the strongest and most capable individuals are given the power to rule over the land. As the realm god lifted her hands, a window materialized before the duo, revealing the rules of the battle royale. All the isekai individuals who had passed the basic tutorial will be granted the covenant title of throne candidates. These candidates would receive a generous allocation of 2,000 points. To increase their chances of survival, the candidates were free to team up with one another, regardless of whether they were candidates or not. Each party was required to select a leader, and only the throne candidates in the party had the right to vote. The party members must follow the leader's command, and in the event of their leader's demise, the next leader would be re-elected by the candidates' votes. During the new voting process, candidates had the option to leave their party if they deemed it necessary. Upon the conclusion of the battle royale, the last remaining team would emerge victorious, earning the coveted title of throne and the choice to return to their original realm. They would also be permitted to take all the accumulated points with them. In addition to the battle royale, there were numerous tasks that the candidates had to complete within a certain time frame. Failure to complete these tasks would result in the death penalty for the entire team. Tiny Pupa and Chenmo's first task was to merge or defeat another team of candidates within a period of 13 days. It was a daunting challenge, but the reward was worth it, 2,000 points that could potentially put them ahead of the competition. The penalty for failure, however, was dire, death for the entire team. As Tiny Pupa and Chenmo contemplated the penalty for failure, the realm god revealed that the point-to-currency ratio was 1 to 100, means that for every point, they can exchange for $100 back home, and that there could be additional rewards depending on how well the task was completed. The duo learned that the battle royale would take place across the entire Yunling continent, with a total of 100 candidates participating. They were able to view their own location on the map, as well as the locations of the other candidates. However, Tiny Pupa couldn't help but wonder why everyone didn't just form a massive party and return to their own realm with the basic 2,000 points. The realm god shook her head and explained that there was a reason why these particular candidates had been chosen. With a snap of her fingers, Tiny Pupa and Chenmo were transported back to Earth. Suddenly, Tiny Pupa found himself standing in front of his family's apartment in a poverty-stricken neighborhood. Confused and disoriented, he looked around, only to see a grocery bag drop to the ground in front of a middle-aged woman, who was frozen in shock at the sight of his sudden appearance of him. As soon as he caught sight of the woman running towards him, he recognized her instantly. It was his mother. She enveloped him in a tight embrace, her pent-up emotions and grievances spilling out of her in a flood of tears. She clung onto him as though afraid he might disappear again, and for a moment, all he could do was hold her and offer comfort. It hadn't been long since Tiny Pupa had learned that his father was in the hospital, and the news had hit him hard. His parents had searched for him relentlessly after he went missing, their anxiety and restlessness taking a toll on his father's already fragile health with the relapse of an old illness. Now, his father lay in a hospital bed, hooked up to a ventilator and fighting for his life. Surgery was the only option, but the cost was exorbitant and way beyond the family's means. However, with his son's return, the woman could finally see a glimmer of hope. Her eyes shone with renewed determination, and she coughed uncontrollably, betraying the fact that she, too, was unwell. Tiny Pupa held onto her tightly, knowing that she had been battling bronchitis and struggling to afford the medication. He gazed into the distance, his eyes fixed and determined, realizing that he had to win the battle royale to bring the much-needed money back home. Meanwhile, across the hospital ward, Chenemo sat beside her mother's bed, recounting to her mother the experiences she had with Tiny Pupa and her new friend. Chenmo's mother lay in a deep coma, her body still and unresponsive. As Chenemo spoke, her voice grew quieter, and she began to tremble, holding back her tears. Ever since her father's death, Chenemo had isolated herself from the world, afraid of forming connections with others. But as she relived her recent experiences with Tiny Pupa, she couldn't hold back her emotions any longer. Tears streamed down her face as she remembered the moment she returned to Earth, only to find her mother in a coma. The doctors had explained that after Chenmo's disappearance, her mother had suffered a mental breakdown, becoming overwhelmed with emotion and slipping into a deep sleep. Although there was still hope for her recovery, the costs of her treatment were astronomical, and Chenemo knew that only by winning the battle royale could she hope to afford the hefty bill and save her mother's life. Suddenly, the two of them were jolted back to the Isekai world, their minds racing with the realization that all of the candidates were also struggling. They understood that they were not alone in their quest for the battle royale prize money and that everyone was fighting for their own reasons. As this thought dawned on them, Chenemo outstretched her hand, and Tiny Pupa immediately understood what she meant. They made a promise to each other, to work together to ascend to the throne and return to Earth victorious. They knew that the road ahead would be long and treacherous, but they also knew that they had each other's backs and that together, they stood a chance at winning the prize money and saving their loved ones. In Seedling Valley, not far from the Spirit Beast Gate, a woman named Gu Lunar kneeled before her superior, reporting that a candidate had appeared at the gate. Gu Lunar was known throughout the land as the Witch of Seedling Valley, her chest adorned with the symbol of the half-lunar. The man standing before her was none other than the leader of Seedling Valley, Ginger Fan. He smirked as he stood on a chair, his eyes glinting with cunning and ambition. He was certain that there were others who had been isekai, just like he had. He ordered Gu Lunar to lead a group to capture these outsiders and bring them to him. Later that night, the dynamic duo made their way toward one of the few remaining buildings in the Spirit Beast Gate. They tended to Simp's injuries to the best of their abilities but knew that they would have to wait until Tiny Pupa's mana fully regenerated before they could completely heal Simp. As night fell, they both drifted off to sleep, exhausted from their efforts. The following morning, Tiny Pupa woke up to a soft sensation on his face, a feeling of comfort that he had not experienced in some time. Chenemo held him in her arms and greeted him with a warm smile, wishing him a good morning. After a long night of rest, Tiny Pupa had regenerated enough mana to heal Simp. Just then, Simp regained consciousness, her eyes opening wide, but her body still unable to move. As she looked around, she saw Tiny Pupa stretching out his tongue and moving closer to her. The screams and moans that emanated from Simp's body could be heard from meters away. Energized by the healing powers of Tiny Pupa, she was covered in saliva, refusing to believe that it was his abilities alone that had cured her. She claimed that it must have been the love she felt for Chenemo that had moved the heavens and brought about her miraculous recovery. Their laughter was abruptly cut short by the appearance of a portal above them. A robotic voice informed them that basic training had come to an end and that all abilities would be reset. The realm god appeared before them and explained the new, more in-depth rules of the world they were about to enter. In the real isekai, each candidate could only have one spirit beast, with a maximum level cap of 100. Tiny Pupa asked why the Beast Tamer Association was able to use so many beasts, but the realm god just smirked and told him to find out for himself. As spirit beasts leveled up, they would obtain new powers and abilities. All candidates would receive a map indicating important landmarks throughout the continent, and the locations of other candidates would be shown if they were extremely close to each other. Parties with a maximum of 5 members could be formed. Simp appeared to be unable to see the realm god and was left wondering who Tiny Pupa was conversing with. Curious, she observed as Tiny Pupa turned around and asked her to join them on a dangerous adventure. However, Simp seemed unimpressed and gave a disapproving look. Suddenly, Tiny Pupa revealed that it was Chenmo's idea to invite Simp along. The mention of Chenmo's name was all it took to change Simp's attitude. She transformed into a playful puppy and eagerly accepted the invitation to join their mission. Before they departed, the realm god spoke her final words of caution to all candidates. The map would gradually shrink, and beyond its borders, they would encounter ferocious monsters waiting to attack. As the duo examined the map, they discovered that they were positioned just outside the border's limits. However, before Simp could even gather her thoughts and change her attire, Chenmo acted quickly. She scooped up Tiny Pupa in one arm, grabbed Simp with the other, and took off running towards the east. As they raced towards their destination, they came across the elder and a group of clan members who had just returned from a training session. Without hesitation, Chenmo retrieved her ring and hurled it toward the elder. It was the sect leader's ring, indicating that the elder would now take over leadership of the sect. The system then relayed a startling message. All candidates' levels had been reset to 1, and an unknown group of beasts was heading straight for their location. The system's announcement seemed almost prophetic, predicting the duo's thoughts and informing them that the approaching wave of beasts would only target the candidates and their companions. The Spirit Beast Gate and its inhabitants would not be harmed. Despite the pleas of the sect members and the elder to stay, without having to worry about the safety of the Spirit Beast Gate, Chenmo and her group abruptly departed without offering an explanation. They ran as fast as they could, but the beasts were hot on their heels, closing in quickly. The red dot on the map, signifying their proximity to the beasts, 300 meters, 200 meters, 150 meters, and 100 meters, grew closer and closer until they were finally overtaken. But when the group looked around, they saw nothing but a shadowy forest. No trace of the beasts remained, leaving them to wonder what had happened and where the creatures had gone. The stillness in the air was almost unsettling until a sudden sound of footsteps shattered the silence. To their surprise, a majestic bunny, adorned with a crown, leaped out of the greenery. Simp couldn't help but chuckle as she strode closer to the bunny, disbelieving that this could be the anticipated beast wave. However, their mirthful moment was quickly shattered and the bunny's eyes started glowing a sinister red. Tiny Pupa let out a piercing scream, warning Simp to stay away from the bunny. It was then that they realized that this was not just any ordinary bunny, but a level 8 hopping bunny with jaws that could swallow them whole. Having spent her entire life confined within the walls of the Spirit Beast Gate, Simp was completely oblivious to the existence of creatures beyond it. As the crowned hopping bunny opened its jaws, she watched in shock as it disgorged over a dozen smaller bunnies and lunged at them with ferocious intent. In a moment of bravery, Tiny Pupa leaped out of Chenmo's arms and stood defiantly in front of the oncoming bunny. He was feeling confident, ready to unleash his formidable Emperor Lion Roar technique. However, to his dismay, he realized that his abilities and level had been inexplicably reset. Instead of unleashing a mighty roar, he let out an embarrassing burp. Without warning, 2 of the smaller bunnies pounced on Tiny Pupa, sinking their teeth into his small and fragile body. Reacting quickly, Chenmo sprang into action and batted the bunnies away, rescuing Tiny Pupa from harm's way. Fortunately, their ability to merge remained intact, and Tiny Pupa transformed into protective armor on Chenmo's arm as they charged forward, wreaking havoc on the swarm of smaller bunnies. But despite their efforts, the number of bunnies seemed to be never-ending. Simp summoned her spirit beast to shield them, and with the added cover, Chenmo leaped into action. Dodging left and right, he approached the crowned bunny and landed a powerful roundhouse kick to its head. The crowned bunny was furious and retaliated with its own attacks, but Chenmo found an opening and delivered a crushing blow to its gut, sending it flying and crashing into a nearby tree trunk. Tiny Pupa bravely hopped in front of the defeated crowned bunny, sinking his teeth into the bunny and activating his devouring skill. The swarm of smaller bunnies watched in horror as their leader vanished into thin air, leaving them to cower in fear of this newfound devil. As a result of the devouring, Tiny Pupa and Chenmo both leveled up to level 3, but their victory was short-lived. They could see the approaching wave of beasts, the ominous red and black cloud looming on the horizon. In a moment of quick thinking, Tiny Pupa instructed the girls to hold on to him tightly. With his new skill obtained from devouring the crowned bunny, he compressed his body and launched into the air, propelling them upward at an astonishing speed. They climbed higher and higher until they reached a dizzying height of 50 meters above ground level. As they began to descend, Simp summoned her spirit beast and instructed it to use its flower ocean ability. A lush bed of colorful blooms grew beneath them, cushioning their landing like a soft mattress. But the girls weren't as lucky. They suddenly found themselves hanging upside down, caught in the vines that had sprouted from the ground. As they caught their breath and checked their location, they realized they were inside the border. However, when they looked at the map, they saw that the surrounding area was covered in heavy fog. They knew that they had to be extra careful in this unfamiliar terrain. Tiny Pupa quickly allocated his stat points to defense, knowing that it was the best way to protect Chinemo. As he did so, Chinemo blushed and covered her face, feeling touched by Tiny Pupa's willingness to go so far as to protect her. Out of nowhere, a shadowy figure leaped off a nearby tree and charged toward the group. With lightning-fast reflexes, Tiny Pupa sensed the danger and pushed Chinemo out of harm's way. Unfortunately, he was unable to save himself from the incoming attack. The figure revealed itself to be a giant mantis, which landed a direct blow on Tiny Pupa. Thankfully, Tiny Pupa's extra defensive stats prevented him from suffering any major injuries. He quickly consulted the system for information on the mantis and discovered that it was a level 15 Reaper mantis. With no time to waste, Tiny Pupa warned the rest of the group of the danger. However, the Reaper mantis wasn't about to back down. With its large, sickle-like arms, it charged toward Tiny Pupa once again. But Chinemo wasn't going to let the mantis harm her friend. With a swift leap, she launched a powerful kick toward the mantis' face. Chinmo's kick packed a mighty punch, causing the ground to shake and sending the mantis flying. However, the resilient insect let out a high-pitched screech, flapped its wings and charged toward the duo once again. With Tiny Pupa on her arm, Chinemo deflected the attack with ease. The mantis realized that it couldn't take on the duo head-on, so it started hopping between the trees with lightning speed, landing a few scratches on the pair. Tiny Pupa shouted toward Simp, urging her to do something to trap the mantis. Simp snapped out of her reverie and summoned her spirit beast, which sprouted a large pile of vines from the ground and aimed toward the mantis. But the mantis was too quick for the vines. It flapped its wings and flew higher, out of reach of the vines. Looking down at the trio, it seemed to taunt them with its eyes, as if saying, "I've got wings, motherfucker." It was clear that the Reaper mantis wouldn't be allowed to escape. With the Tiny Pupa ready to step up its game, it expanded onto Chinmo's legs and transformed into a leg armor. This gave Chinmo a much-needed boost in agility, allowing her to leap high into the air. The Reaper mantis was clearly taken aback by this sudden turn of events. Before it had time to react, Chinmo landed a devastating punch on its guts, penetrating it from behind. As a result, the duo leveled up to level 5 and Simp also leveled up. Upon examining the mantis's corpse, the Tiny Pupa couldn't help but feel that something was off. How was it possible that the mantis couldn't dodge the attack? Its reaction speed seemed to have decreased significantly. Suddenly, everything felt as though it had been turned upside down. Simp felt overwhelming drowsiness, and then without warning, she gushed out blood and collapsed onto the ground. The duo was taken aback by this sudden turn of events. In the forest shrouded by an ominous fog, Tiny Pupa surveyed the scene, only to discover its deadly nature. With each passing moment, small birds succumbed to their toxic embrace, falling helplessly to the ground. The poison's malevolence seemed to intensify, gripping the air with a tighter hold. Amidst this peril, Tiny Pupa's keen sight unraveled that the party members' stats were shared, visible to see. To their astonishment, Simp's spirit beast had gained a newfound skill, unbeknownst even to herself, a skill of purification acquired through leveling up. As Simp's spirit beast unleashed her purification abilities, the surrounding atmosphere gradually cleared, lifting the suffocating fog's veil. With a sense of relief, the trio began contemplating their next move when suddenly, a sinuous and enigmatic figure emerged, slithering through the forest in an erratic pattern. Tiny Pupa's acute senses detected the rustling of grass behind them. Swiftly turning around, they were confronted by the sight of a colossal serpent, its monstrous form veiled in darkness. It hungered its bloody maw agape, closing in on the trio with an insatiable desire. Y'all seeing what I'm seeing? It kinda looks like, you know what? Gripping the lifeless body of a fallen reaper mantis, it sank its jaws into its prey, gnashing and tearing with relentless ferocity.